Aloha, my name is Heather Simon, and today my presentation will be about activism. How can I be an activist? Let me count the ways. Let's start by defining activism. Activism is a doctrine or practice that emphasizes direct, vigorous action, especially in support of or in opposition to one side of a controversial issue. We typically think of activism as protesting or not buying products of a certain company because we don't agree with their moral philosophy. Rioting could also possibly be a form of activism, but usually is the opposite of activism, so let's not get them confused. This presentation is going to talk about activism through writing and how it can come out in various forms. Some writers are pretty direct and to the point. Their words sound pretty harsh, whereas other kinds of writers just tell a story, and when you get to the end, you realize that they were really trying to make a big point. So I'm going to start with a poem by Craig Santos Perez, who is currently a Pacific Literature and Creative Writing teacher at UH Manoa. He is a Chamorro from the island of Guam, and he is quite active in his voice about the Pacific Islands and how they have kind of all been taken over by America and various other European cultures, and that there are a lot of things that people that aren't from the islands don't know about the islands, and maybe they wouldn't look at things quite the same way if they saw them from the perspective of the islanders. Just a tiny bit more about him. He also runs a publishing and editing company that focuses specifically on Pacific Island editors and publishers, writers, because he feels that there weren't any out there, and it was very hard for his people to get any of their writing published, so he started his own company to help with that. I know this is pretty hard to read, so I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. It's called The Detour of the World War II Valor in the Pacific National Monument. Every year, more than 1 million tourists march through military museums, memorials, and ghostly battleships as Remember Pearl Harbor echoes with patriotic fervor. But what if they learned how to pronounce Pu'uloa, the Hawaiian name for this sacred place, where pristine watersheds once flowed to the sovereign sea, once birthed an estuary teeming with spawn, fish, and oysters? What if tourists praise Ka'ahupahau, who, in the form of a shark, protected the harbor for generations? What if they recognize the reciprocity between sugar profits, white men, and the sharpened edge of a bayonet constitution? Would they recite every name on the Ku'e petition and finally hear the true history of the overthrow and illegal annexation? Would January 17, 1893 live in infamy? What if tourists were given a free map of PACOM, the Pacific Command? Would they feel its eyes and tentacles surveilling and strangling 36 countries and half the world's population? What if they hiked to all 700 toxic Superfund sites in Pearl Harbor and enjoyed a picnic of wild-caught seafood from these contaminated waters? What if this monument of valor instead condemned violence? What if national and state parks didn't simply preserve the myth of American innocence, but actually told the truth about American empire? Would you offer prayer and respect to the ancient bones buried here under layers of soil and story? Would you give more than an apology? Would these stolen places finally return to their native stewards and descendants? maybe then these tributes to colonial power will finally become healing testaments of peace. So to me, this poem is a piece of activism because I feel like he's fighting for the true meaning of Pearl Harbor and fighting for the quote-unquote other side of the story to be told. And that's what activism is all about, to make people see your side of the issue, whatever it may be. The other piece that I chose to look at was the preface of the book by Gary Pack that we read in class, Living with Spirits, Writing as Activism. Pretty obvious as to why. For those that don't remember, it starts out talking about Gary Pack's childhood, and throughout the piece he talks about how he uses writing to share his voice, how there are many different stories that he would like to write down because they're not written down, and he feels that they're important to share. And through history, he was raised as a Korean, Hawaiian American, and he mentions that one of the most difficult parts of his life was realizing that one part of himself was responsible for the destruction of the other, in a sense, and how he would like to use writing to talk that out and share with other people what happened to him and maybe different solutions for dealing with it and what they can do to get back some of those pieces that were lost. My favorite quote from the whole chapter is the one written here, when he's speaking about his child. If there's anything that we can give him and other siblings he may have later, it is the gift of being able to think critically and independently and to be able to express himself bravely. That goes along with his writing as activism and peacefully using his words to fight battles. So if you were curious on ways to be an activist, some of the things you can do are use your words. You can use soft words like Gary Pack does, or a little bit rougher words like Craig Perez does. Protests are always something that activists are doing, for the most part. You can have silent protests, such as sit-ins. They used to do those a lot back during the civil rights movement. Vocal protests, which we saw a lot of during last year's election. Not buying items from certain businesses, not eating certain foods. Those are all forms of protest. Giving your friends or family members the silent treatment is a small form of a protest. You're upset with them for something they did, so you're protesting it. And you can become an activist just by becoming involved. Sometimes being part of a group that supports an oppressed community without overtaking it, can be a form of activism. Getting involved, doing stuff, providing awareness for different issues or different communities that maybe nobody is noticing. All of that is forms of activism. So here are a couple of pictures of different protests. This is from one of the many protests up on Mauna Kea during the time of TMT. We'll likely see some more soon, as I believe they're about to get their licenses back to start building again. I could be very wrong on that, but we know that we'll see protests. Haleakala had a lot of protesting when they went to put observatories up there as well. Here's one of the many, many protests during the election cycle this past year. This looks like it's in New York City. I'm not 100% sure. but I'm sure we all saw many of those. So I leave you with this quote by Margaret Mead. It's always touched me to the core. And some further questions that could come out of this project is, maybe why is activism important? What other ways are there to show activism? I'm sure there are many other pieces of literature that could be considered activist literature. So looking into some of those could take this project a step further. But if I were to do it again and continue on, I would probably focus on the why. Why is activism important? And I think that comes back to this quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Mahalo for listening. Have a great day.